The apartment lights blazed, an unnatural brightness that prickled the air as she crossed the threshold. Usually they were dimmed, a soft welcome home, but not tonight. I didn't question her tardiness. I didn't ask where the hours had dissolved. I certainly didn't inquire about the text that lit her phone at 11:17 p.m., precisely as she fumbled with the car lock in our quiet driveway. I just watched. Her blazer, the same one she'd left in that morning, was buttoned askew, a detail utterly out of character for the meticulously composed Ramona Lang. Her eyes, usually so assured, widened imperceptibly when she found me on the sofa, a silent sentinel in the unexpected glare. It was as if she'd choreographed a different homecoming, one where she glided past me, washing away the lie before it could take root. But I remained silent. Instead, my hand drifted to the side table. A soft tap on my phone screen, and then her voice, clear and undeniably hers, filled the room. No, Lincoln still thinks I'm at the client dinner. He actually packed my charger for me this morning. Bless his heart. A ripple of laughter, then a man's voice, low and laced with a predatory smugness. Your husband's a saint. He's soft, she whispered, the words a cruel caress. Safe, comfortable. You're the spark. Then the unmistakable symphony of intimacy, sounds that left no room for doubt or denial. Ramona stared at the polished hardwood floor, as if willing the recording to cease its damning testimony simply by refusing to blink. Her vibrant complexion bled to an ashen pallor. Her knees faltered, and she clutched the nearest wall, as if the plaster could absorb the gravity of what I could not. Still, I offered no sound. But I hadn't always been this silent observer. No, I was the man who'd meticulously organized her vitamins, who slipped encouraging notes into her lunchbox before a major pitch, who celebrated every minor triumph as if it were a miracle of personal ascension. I had been loud with devotion, boisterous with hope, unwavering in my belief in her. Until I wasn't. Because when a truth so brutal it unravels your entire existence is laid bare in under 60 seconds, there's only one course left. Let the silence echo everything. And it did. You might think you know what happened next, but the moment the recording concluded and she finally tried to speak, it transformed from a mere betrayal into something far more insidious. She didn't utter my name. Not immediately. She simply stood, her jacket slipping from one shoulder, her lips slightly parted, caught in the agonizing indecision between weeping and outright denial. Her gaze was fixed on my phone, as if it were the betrayer, not her. I'd braced myself for a shriek, perhaps a flimsy excuse, some pathetic attempt to spin it into a misunderstanding. Instead, she whispered, Lincoln, I can explain. I didn't flinch. My eyes remained unblinking. The chasm of silence between us was more deafening than any words she could have conceived. She took a tentative step forward. Please, that recording doesn't mean what you think. Another step. I pushed myself up from the sofa. She froze. I told you I was at dinner, she added quickly, as if merely restating the lie could somehow erase the damning evidence still vibrating in the air. It was work, that's all. I reached for my phone, carefully powering it off as if handling a volatile, radioactive element. Then I walked past her. She attempted to block my path, her hand trembling as it reached out, mascara already smudged beneath her eyes. Lincoln, just listen. Please, it was just one time. It didn't mean anything. I stopped. One time? My memory reeled with days of recordings, multiple encounters, different voices, the same fabric of deceit. I hadn't even played the most egregious one, the one where she joked about my gullibility, how effortlessly she could vanish for hours because Lincoln always assumes the best in people. It's adorable. I've been called many things in my life, reserved, methodical, predictable, but adorable was a recent, unexpected addition to the list. I ironed your silk blouse the morning you left for that conference, I said, my back still to her. The one where you claimed you barely had time to eat. You didn't return with your wedding ring. Said you lost it at the hotel. A soft gasp escaped her lips behind me. Perhaps she realized then that my statement wasn't a coincidence. Perhaps she realized I wasn't as oblivious as she had presumed. I found it, I continued. Not in the hotel. It was in your gym bag wrapped in a crumpled cocktail napkin next to a receipt for an exorbitant bottle of champagne. Her breath hitched, a ragged sound. Tears were imminent, though not yet flowing. And a ghost of my former self, the man who still believed in us, wanted to turn, to hold her, to murmur that we could mend it, that we could seek counseling or pore over one of those saccharine marriage self-help books with their pastel covers and relentlessly hopeful titles. But that man, the one who craved such remedies, had expired approximately 27 minutes into that very first recording. I ascended the stairs without uttering another syllable. Behind me, I heard the soft thud of her knees hitting the floor. Not from remorse, I realized, but from a burgeoning panic. She knew I wasn't enraged. I was simply done. And that, I understood, terrified her more profoundly than any outburst ever could. You'll want to hear what Ramona did next, especially when I thought she'd finally broken down in guilt. But it wasn't guilt at all. It was something far worse. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was consumed by anger or choked by heartbreak. Those emotions, at least, would have felt substantial. What I felt was far more unsettling. A pervasive numbness, a hollowness, as if my own skin no longer quite contained me. I lay in our bed, still fully clothed, staring at the ceiling, while Ramona remained downstairs. I could discern her restless pacing, punctuated by occasional stifled sobs, and the low murmur of her voice as she spoke to someone on the phone. It was that same hushed tone she employed when she didn't want me to overhear, a voice I'd consciously ignored for far too long. By dawn, she was gone. Not gone irrevocably, not yet. Her sleek car still gleamed in the driveway. Her designer purse lay casually on the kitchen counter. But she herself was absent from the house, her departure marked by no note, no message. Just her void, hanging in the air like the lingering smoke from a candle improperly extinguished. I didn't call her. She returned around 8:01 a.m. Her makeup was smudged, her usually immaculate hair pulled back into a loose, haphazard bun she'd always claimed to despise. She regarded me with an unsettling expression, as if I were the one who owed her an apology, as if I had merely overreacted to some trivial misunderstanding. She initiated the conversation with, "Lincoln, we need to talk." And I almost laughed. Not because anything was remotely humorous anymore, but because of the sheer, breathtaking audacity required to utter those words after everything that had transpired. She settled across from me at the kitchen table, her hands trembling slightly. "Lincoln, I need to be honest with you. I haven't been happy for a long time." That was her opening gambit. Not "I'm sorry," not "I messed up," not even a whimper of genuine remorse, just her own unhappiness. I wanted to scream, to lash out, but I didn't. I simply nodded, the way one nods at a mechanic delivering the grim prognosis that your engine is irreparably seized. Like, "Yes, of course it is. You already sensed the car was dead long before you brought it in for inspection." "I know I should have come to you sooner," she continued, twisting her fingers as if trying to conjure invisible rings. "But I didn't want to hurt you." I stared at her. "You didn't want to hurt me, so you lied for months, slept around, used my trust as cover?" I stated, my voice barely a whisper. "Ramona, you didn't avoid hurting me. You just scheduled it." She actually had the nerve to flinch. She began to cry again. Finally. But I observed her face meticulously this time, and a chilling realization dawned upon me. She wasn't crying for me. She was crying for herself, for being exposed, for the spectacular collapse of her meticulously constructed narrative, for losing control of the story she believed herself to be authoring. And as she sat there, wiping away tears with the very hand that had touched another man just hours earlier, a darker truth solidified. She still didn't believe she had committed anything unforgivable, merely something inconvenient, disruptive, perhaps a bit messy, but certainly not cruel. That terrified me more profoundly than the affair ever could. I stood up. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice raw. "To get some air," I replied. But in truth, I needed to reach the storage unit where I'd sequestered the rest of the recordings. Because what she didn't know, what she would never anticipate, was that this was no longer solely about her infidelity. It was about everything she'd uttered when she believed I'd never hear, and I was done pretending I hadn't. Here's what no one tells you about betrayal. It doesn't always feel like a sudden explosion. Sometimes it's a slow, agonizing unraveling, meticulously revealing layers of deceit you never knew existed. The storage unit wasn't far, a standard 10x10 space just off the highway, the kind of anonymous box people rent when they're either downsizing their lives or concealing something significant. In my case, it was a little of both. I'd quietly moved a box of essentials a week before I ever played that initial recording for her. Not because I possessed perfect foresight, but because some primal instinct within me, perhaps the last vestiges of self-preservation, was attempting to brace me for impact. That box contained my backup drive, the one that automatically synced the audio logs from her car. When I first installed it, I'd promised myself I wouldn't activate it unless it was absolutely necessary. But that line, absolutely necessary, proved to be a continuously shifting goalpost in a game I never wanted to play. Initially, I'd only skim through, listening for 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there. Then I heard the name Julian Stone. Then I heard her laugh, a vibrant, unrestrained sound, like she used to laugh with me, but sharper, freer, as if she were finally shedding a pretense. Still, there was one file I hadn't dared to touch, the one from that weekend. She'd claimed it was a company retreat in Palm Springs. She'd returned home with a light sunburn, radiating relaxation, humming a jaunty tune from the 2000s, the kind she only ever played on our long road trips. She'd pressed a light kiss to my head and said, "You really should have come, but I know, work deadlines and all." She'd even presented me with a souvenir mug, adorned with a cartoon cactus. It sat in the cabinet, right next to the one I owned that declared, "World's okayest husband." Now sitting on the frigid concrete floor of the unit, I plugged the small drive into my ancient laptop and navigated to the Palm Springs folder. The audio began with a car door slamming, then the indistinct shuffle of bags being tossed into the back seat. Ramona's voice, light and playful, followed. "Do you think he suspects anything?" Another voice responded. Male, confident, and definitively not Julian Stone. A new one. "Your husband? Please, I've seen houseplants with more situational awareness." Laughter. Her laughter. "Poor Lincoln. He probably thinks I'm networking." "Technically, you are," he drawled, followed by something utterly unrepeatable. I paused the recording, not because I couldn't endure it, but because I could endure it too well. That's what truly terrified me. How had I become so accustomed to hearing her treat me like a mere background extra in a grand narrative where she was the undisputed star? It wasn't just the physical infidelity. It was the crushing contempt. The way she dismissed me like a bland cup of tea she sipped out of rote habit. Never genuine enjoyment. I fast-forwarded a few minutes and pressed play again. They were in the hotel room now, their voices soft, the kind of tired, giddy chatter people exchange when they believe they are utterly safe from detection. "I should probably fake a fight with him soon," she mused. "Make him feel guilty. That way, when I disappear for a weekend again, he'll blame himself." That particular line didn't numb me. It gutted me. All this time I'd agonized, wondering if I was too quiet, too boring, too entrenched in routine. I'd questioned if I wasn't romantic enough, not exciting enough, not manly enough. But she hadn't left me, mentally, emotionally, physically, because I lacked something fundamental. She'd done it because it was easy, because I was easy. I left the storage unit in silence, the drive clenched in my hand, my heart constricted in a way that felt utterly final. Not furious, not hysterical, just definitive. And I knew precisely what my next step had to be. Not an act of vengeance, not a dramatic scene, just one small, precise act that would speak louder than anything she had ever uttered about me. Act now or regret it later. Sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is to simply disappear. I didn't head home right away. I sat in my car outside a sprawling supermarket for nearly an hour, the engine off, my hands gripping the steering wheel, as if it were the sole tether preventing me from completely unraveling. People ambled past with carts overflowing with groceries. Children whined, a distant dog barked from an open car window, and I simply sat there, trying to comprehend how I had devolved into a man incapable of confronting his own wife without the crutch of a recording device to articulate his pain. But what haunted me most wasn't her specific words. It was the horrifying effortlessness of it all. The way she discussed manipulating me as if it were a shrewd business strategy, not an act of profound cruelty. As if she were the CEO of our marriage, and I merely an underperforming intern she needed to gently, yet firmly, manage out of the company. I didn't crave revenge. Not truly. What I desperately needed was clarity, a definitive closure. Not for her, she could weave whatever narrative she pleased. But for me, I needed to witness the full extent of her deception, to see how far she would descend when all the curtains were irrevocably pulled back. So I did something I never would have previously considered. I printed out a single note, just one line. Listen to everything, then come find me if you still can. I slipped the note into a small nondescript envelope with a plain black USB drive, the one containing all the recordings, the laughter, the lies, the dismissive voices, every damning detail. I knew she wouldn't check her car. She never did, but she always checked the dishwasher. Every time she returned home from work, she would open it out of ingrained habit, sometimes just to ascertain if I'd run the cycle as promised, sometimes to retrieve the one cherished coffee mug she refused to part with, the one her sister had gifted her in college, bearing the inscription, "Big decisions start with small sips." That mug was her strange comfort object. I carefully placed the envelope gently behind it, tucked into the top rack between a forgotten salad spinner and the lid of a slow cooker we hadn't used in years. Then I washed my hands, gathered my keys, and walked out. I left no message. I didn't slam the door. I didn't even take a suitcase. Just my wallet, my phone, and the crushing knowledge that she would eventually discover the one truth she couldn't possibly ignore. Hours dissolved into the night. I found refuge in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, the kind with scratchy towels and a perpetually buzzing wall-mounted air conditioner that never quite cooled the room. Around 11:40 p.m., my phone's screen flared to life. Ramona Lang, Lincoln, what the hell is this? Please tell me this is a joke. I offered no reply. At 12:03 a.m., Ramona Lang, I don't even remember saying half of those things. You must have edited it. You're being insane. At 12:14 a.m., Ramona Lang, Lincoln, please just answer. I'm scared. You disappeared. I stared at her words as if they emanated from a complete stranger. She hadn't said, "I'm sorry." She hadn't admitted, "I was wrong." She hadn't even posed the obvious question. Why did you record me? She was simply scared. Not for me, I realized. For herself. I powered off my phone, lay back on the unforgiving motel bed, and for the first time in what felt like months, a faint, genuine smile touched my lips. What I'm about to show is banned in 12 countries. Because the next morning, when she finally tracked me down, this story truly pivoted. She didn't arrive alone, and what she brought with her, it changed everything. The knock came just after 9. Not frantic, not aggressive, but steady. The kind of deliberate rhythm that says, "I know you're in there, and I'm not leaving until you answer." I checked into the motel under my middle name, Curtis, and hadn't breathed a word to anyone about my whereabouts. So when I opened the door and found her standing there, I wasn't surprised. What did surprise me was the figure beside her, Desmond, her brother. The same Desmond who hadn't spoken to me in 3 years after I refused to loan him money for a startup that ultimately proved to be a front for an offshore poker operation. He was the quintessential charmer, the kind of man who drifted through life on a current of half-truths, always landing on his feet, regardless of who he trampled in the process. I hadn't seen his face since the Christmas Ramona had excoriated me for embarrassing him in front of the entire family. Now he stood there, holding my wife's small suitcase, regarding me as if I were the fundamental problem. Ramona spoke first, her voice brittle, not from genuine sadness, but from the immense pressure of trying to hold together a carefully rehearsed script that was now visibly unraveling. Lincoln, please, can we talk? Not like this. Not here. I didn't step aside. He doesn't come in. Desmond scoffed, a practiced, dismissive sound. Relax, man. I'm just here to make sure she's okay. Ironic, I replied, my voice flat. Considering I've spent the last 3 years attempting to do precisely that. He offered no retort, simply maintaining that smug, practiced smirk, as if he were bestowing a profound favor upon me. Ramona glided past me without asking permission, her eyes darting around the austere motel room as if it were a freshly revealed crime scene. She looked different, unkempt, uncomposed, and not in the crying, devastated kind of way. More like someone caught red-handed in a petty theft, now boiling with fury at her exposure. She perched delicately on the edge of the bed, clasping her hands as though she were about to present me with an apology she herself didn't believe. I listened to the recordings, she stated, her voice tight. All of them. I nodded once and slowly. I'm not proud of what you heard, Lincoln, but you have to understand. I was lost. I didn't know how to talk to you anymore. We stopped being Oz a long time ago. Perhaps because you kept giving pieces of us to everyone else, I countered, my voice low and steady. I wasn't perfect, but I was always present. She flinched, almost imperceptibly, but the reaction was there. I know what I did was wrong, she said carefully, her eyes meticulously tracking my expression. But going behind my back, recording me, setting me up like that, that's not love either. It was then that a terrifying realization solidified. She still believed this was a mutual failure, a shared breakdown. She still genuinely believed we were on equal footing, that my desperate need for answers somehow rendered me the villain in a narrative where she had authored the core betrayal. Desmond stepped forward, his jaw tight. Look, man, if you want to split, split. But don't drag this out. She's hurting too. I laughed, not because anything was amusing, but because the sheer absurdity of his statement was staggering. He hadn't seen the files. He hadn't heard her mocking me, plotting, meticulously rehearsing her excuses. She's hurting? I asked, my voice rising slightly. Tell me, Desmond, how many times did she come to you while I was sitting at home, making her dinner? How many times did she laugh about what a safe bet I was? His eyes darted nervously. She offered no reply. I stepped back and pointed to the door. Take your sister. Take her suitcase. I'll handle the rest. Ramona stood but remained rooted to the spot. She looked at me then, truly looked at me, as if seeing me clearly for the very first time. Not as the soft-spoken, accommodating man she believed she could mold, but as a man who was utterly and irrevocably done with being underestimated. You think this ends with you walking away? She whispered, her voice laced with a bitter challenge. You think you can just disappear and feel righteous about it? I offered no answer, because I wasn't merely walking away, I was starting over. And the way I planned to do it would ensure she could never ever play the victim again. But for that, I needed just one more thing. Ready to learn the shocking truth? Sometimes the deepest cuts are made by those who claim to love you most. After they left, I didn't feel victorious, just still. It was the strangest sensation, like the tempest had finally passed, but I was left uncertain if anything worth salvaging had survived its destructive path. Ramona hadn't begged. She hadn't offered the kind of profound apology I desperately needed to hear. There was no cathartic collapse, no genuine breakdown, just a reflexive defensiveness and a half-hearted attempt to guilt-trip me into silence. That, I realized, was her version of closure. But I wasn't finished. Back at the storage unit, I'd already made meticulous copies of everything. Not to leak the sordid details, not to publicly shame her, not to maliciously destroy her professional reputation. I was not that man. But I needed to understand the true genesis of what had happened. Not merely the mechanics of the affair, I already possessed those ugly blueprints. What I didn't know was precisely how early it had begun, or the terrifying degree of calculation that underscored it. That night, alone in the quiet of the unit, I opened a folder I hadn't touched, labeled simply voicemails. There were dozens of them, some clearly accidental, others intentionally left. Most were her calling Julian Stone, or Brent, or whoever else was currently in rotation. but one file stood out. It was from nearly 2 years ago. The timestamp perfectly matched the night she'd returned home from a girls' weekend, flushed and oddly distracted, claiming one of her friends had imbibed too much and required her devoted care. I remembered how she'd climbed into bed fully dressed, curling away from me, her back a wall. I pressed play. At first, just muffled movement. Then her voice, urgent, breathless, a raw confession caught unawares. I can't keep pretending he's enough. I know that sounds awful, Julian, but I feel like I'm suffocating every time he talks about his day or asks me what I want for dinner. He's so small, Julian, like his world is so safe, and I just need to feel something again. My stomach twisted into a painful knot. I'd expected coldness, perhaps even outright mockery, but this wasn't that. This was something far crueler, the chilling language of emotional disdain. She hadn't merely cheated on me. She had systematically shrunk me down in her mind until I was no longer a person, just inanimate furniture, a bland placeholder for comfort, and I'd loved her through all of it. Every thoughtful dinner, every mundane grocery run, every instance I'd rubbed her feet without being asked. Every single moment I believed I was showing up for her, she was busy erasing me in the background. I closed my laptop and simply sat there. I don't know how long. Then I opened a blank email composition and typed a single message. I heard it all. I hope you remember what I gave you, because I never will again. No signature, no explicit threats, just the stark, unvarnished truth. But I didn't send it to Ramona. I sent it to her mother. Why? Because for years, Ramona's family had regarded me as if I'd won an improbable lottery. "You're so lucky to have her," they'd frequently declare. "She's way out of your league." Her mother once jovially joked that I must have caught Ramona in a momentary lapse of judgment to land a woman of her caliber. I'd always laughed along, played my assigned part, but now I wanted them to confront the complete picture, not to inflict pain upon Ramona, but to correct the distorted record, to reclaim my own name. After 95% of people miss this simple trick. The most powerful message is often delivered to the most unexpected recipient. What happened the next day was something I was utterly unprepared for, because her mother didn't reply by email. She simply showed up, and what she told me, it made everything so much worse, and yet, paradoxically, a little better. When I opened the door of the humble motel room and saw Ramona's mother standing there, her face etched with a gravity I hadn't anticipated, I braced myself. I assumed she would launch into a fierce defense of Ramona, shame me for sharing private messages, perhaps even demand that I be a man and sweep the entire sordid affair under the rug, as so many others had indirectly suggested. But she did none of that. She stood silently for a long moment, then slowly raised her phone. "I listened to the voicemail," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, saying nothing. Then she looked at me, really looked at me, and her face transformed in a way I had never witnessed before. Not pity, not anger, just a profound, unsettling realization. "I had no idea," she whispered, her voice cracking slightly. "I thought you were just quiet. Turns out you were surviving." Those words struck me harder than all the lies, all the painful recordings, all the late nights spent agonizing over what irreparable flaw I possessed. Because finally, someone truly saw me. Someone who mattered in her life. And for the very first time, I didn't feel small. She sat across from me in the same utilitarian motel room Ramona had stood in and revealed things I never expected to hear. That Ramona had always possessed an inherent restlessness. That she had been subtly conditioned from a young age to never settle, to perpetually chase the next perceived best thing, even if it meant leaving people in her wake. That her own father, it turned out, had done precisely the same thing to her. "She doesn't know how to stay," Ramona's mother said softly. Her eyes filled with a weary understanding. "But you did. You stayed too long. And I'm so deeply sorry we never saw what that truly cost you. It didn't magically fix everything, but it provided a measure of solace. It was the first authentic thread of closure I hadn't had to painstakingly pull myself." A week later, I quietly filed for divorce. Without drama, without fanfare, no sensational press, no petty revenge, no viral posts. I relinquished the house, the furniture, the souvenir coffee mugs, all of it. I took only my cherished books, my vinyl collection, and a single faded photograph of myself from before I had met her. The one where I was genuinely laughing, a wide, uninhibited grin, standing at the edge of the ocean as if utterly oblivious to the tumultuous tides that lay ahead. And slowly, painstakingly, I rebuilt. It wasn't a dramatic, cinematic transformation montage. Just day after day, I began to breathe again, to sleep without compulsively checking my phone. I began to remember who Lincoln Lowell was before I became Ramona Lang's husband. And one day I looked in the mirror and didn't see a broken man anymore. I saw a free one. My hands were trembling as I did this. What's the biggest truth you've had to face? Share a moment that cracked you open and changed how you see the world.